Good afternoon and welcome to this session where we plan to talk specifically about MICAT just a day before the test. So, what is it that you want to talk about today? So, we've already conducted quite a few sessions on MICAT. In fact, even a day before yesterday, Srinivas had a very detailed discussion on MICAT where he talked about the various components and how you can go ahead and approach those components. So if you need any additional clarity on any of those points, please let me know and I'd love to help you. And I actually plan to build on that. Apart from that, if you have any hesitation, any question, any concern about MICAT, this is the place for you to be. So my name is Vikrant. I have been helping MBA aspirants realize their dreams for 21 years. So I bring all that experience for you on this channel, that is BYJU'S CAT Prep channel, where we help you get into your dream B school, which can be a non-IIM as well, right? So any question, any concern, drop it down in the comment box below, and let us start with our last minute tips for MICAT. So what do we know about the MICAT? We know that MICA gives a significant amount of weightage to the MICAT. In fact, if you want to make it to this college, 30% of the weightage will come from the MICAT, and the MICAT essentially consists of these three things. Okay, so you have a psychometric test where you get 150 questions and you are supposed to solve them. I shouldn't even say solve them, respond to them in 30 minutes. Then a descriptive test where you have argument writing and story writing. And finally, you have this conventional aptitude test. So actually, if I look at it technically, even this aptitude test is kind of a psychometric test technically. But for the sake of this discussion, let us say that we have a separate aptitude test. So let's start with the psychometric test. Now, as the name itself suggests, it is designed to get some insights about your mind. So essentially, it is used to measure suitability and fit. So whenever you apply for a role, whenever you apply for a job, in this case, you are applying for the job of a student at MICA who will eventually become an expert in strategic marketing and communication, right? So they'll check how suitable you are for that kind of a job or that. Sorry, my bad here. I think when the weather changes, I get the sniffles. So they'll check how suitable you are, how fit you are. So these questions or this psychometric test, if I actually try to evaluate it technically, I say that this psychometric test is designed to get a peek into your personality and your ability to take decisions in those contexts which are relevant for MICA. So you have questions that are based on interpersonal skills, questions that are designed to see how you think / your thought process, questions that check your emotional capabilities and responses, and finally you may also have questions which check your situational judgment. So as the name suggests, they give you a scenario, they give you a situation, and they ask you for how you are going to respond to it. Or they may give you a scenario along with the response, then they'd ask you whether this response is an appropriate response or not. Hi Janvi, any question? Anything that you want to ask? So I hope you get the drift. So in these questions, what the examiner will do is that he'll give you a statement and you are supposed to tell the examiner whether this statement reflects your personality or not, whether this statement is consistent with your personal attributes or not. So for example, you can get a statement like, I always take risks. So do you or do you not? Or I find routine boring. Do you or do you not? So a lot of people think that they can game it, but then the truth is psychometric tests are designed very carefully. They're designed in such a way that we are able to get a true picture. How do we do that? Number one, by giving you very little amount of time to think. So you've got 30 minutes, 150 questions, you won't even have a lot of time to think. And therefore, your instinct is likely to take over. And number two, even if you start thinking, what you'd notice is that you'd have multiple questions designed to test, designed to check the same trait. So if I want to look for a particular ability, let us say I want to see whether you are a risk taker or not, then I am likely to put in some 6-7 questions. And if you are answering intuitively, all your answers to all of those questions are going to be in sync. But that said, here is something that I do use when it comes to appearing for these tests, and let me share that with you. So the first thing that I do is that I put myself in the shoes of the examiner, or to give you a better mental picture, put yourself in the shoes of the interviewer. Now see, there is no interviewer here, but then imagine when you go to an interview room, do you not try to customize your answers according to the job that you have applied for? Do you not customize your answers according to the preferences of the organization or the interviewer? Similarly, here too, you are supposed to customize your answers in order to portray those qualities, those competencies, those personality attributes that are relevant to MICA. So ideally, you would like to figure out those traits which are desirable. Let's call them beneficial traits. So for example, it's obvious that if you apply to MICA, they want people to have superior communication skills. They want people to have creativity. They want people to have the ability to understand the consumer, connect with others. This desire to know others, this ability to get a peek into what the other person is actually thinking. And then there can be more, right? So it's just a list for you to begin with. So first up, in an ideal world, you'd like to see whether you have these qualities or not. If you have, then you go ahead and apply to MICA. And if you don't have these qualities, you would ideally like to skip. But now that you've applied to the college and you're keen on getting in, just flip it a bit and keep on reminding yourself that these are the kind of qualities you are supposed to portray and work from there. Okay, so Janvi, that is exactly what I've been talking about. That just flip it. For example, here is a question. Okay, I get nervous talking to people I've just met. True or false? Now we know that people can be introverts. We know people can be extroverts. We know there are people who find it very easy to strike a conversation with somebody they've just met. And then we have people who become very self-conscious when they are in the company of new individuals. So there is no right or wrong answer in psychometric test. Okay, it's just about being a right fit or not being a right fit. So it's not about right or wrong. It's about being a right fit. So if I look at it, it's possible that I am somebody who gets nervous around other people, but then I know that I am applying for a position where communication skills are important, openness and comfort with others is important. And therefore, in the exam, I'll choose false because it is closer to the traits desired by the examiner. Or here is another one. We live in an unfair world. Here are your options. What do you think? What's going to be your answer? What's going to be your answer? We live in an unfair world. So, this is another way in which questions can be framed. Strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, strongly disagree. So, what's your take? IT, any last minute tips? IT, that's exactly what I'm talking about. I'm just building on the session that Srinivas sir took for you day before yesterday. And just saying that, okay, certain things that can make you approach the various sections better. So what will you choose and why? Of course, in the exam, you're not supposed to answer a why, but what do you think? What would you like to mark as your answer in the exam? Okay, so Aryan says neutral. So neutral is, I have no opinion on this, okay. In this case, we live in an unfair world. If you're neutral, it means that, I neither agree nor disagree, which is basically like saying no comments. Okay, so let us see. Let's just convert it into a yes or a no question. Okay, let's see. If I say that yes, we live in an unfair world, then what sort of qualities do I portray? Think of it this way. What am I expressing or communicating? On the other hand, if I say no, then too, what am I expressing or communicating? So what exactly do we mean by unfair? Unfair is where something bad happens to you even though you do not deserve it. Right? That's basically our definition of fair and unfair. Fair is what is right and what is wrong. Unfair is you don't deserve it, but something wrong happens to you or something right happens to you. So come to think of it, the kind of family that we are born in, that in a way gives us a kind of head start. The city or the country that you are born in, even that can be advantageous for you. Then there are people who are born with disabilities, and then there are people who become disabled because of some unfortunate circumstances in life. So you realize not all of us are starting at an equal footing. If I'm aware of it, I'm likely to be more compassionate. I'm likely to be more considerate. I'm likely to give people that benefit of doubt. On the other hand, if I think it is a fair world, then whatever situation a person finds himself in, he is the one who's responsible for it. And in this case, I may not be as compassionate. So you notice, so I deliberately picked up this question. It's a tricky, challenging question. In the exam, I'd rather choose agree because I see that around me. So don't mark neutral in a question only because it makes you uncomfortable. Just think if you have time. You'd actually be saving a lot of time on a lot of these questions. Although typically you are supposed to answer but 5 questions per minute, so 20 seconds, but you will be able to answer a lot of these questions in around 10 seconds, maybe even fewer seconds. So you can here and there maybe spend some amount of thought. And don't forget that psychometric test is qualifying in nature. If you don't clear this test, they're not even going to evaluate you on the next 2 sections. So put your best foot forward. And here the best foot forward is choosing those answers that are consistent with those personality attributes that are required by MICAT. Strategic marketing, communication, remember. And here is another pro tip: do not opt for strongly agree or strongly disagree very consistently. So I normally, if the statement involves ethics or morality, I generally side with strongly agree or strongly disagree. But for the rest of the questions, I may occasionally feel very strongly about something, but I'm not going to be very consistent about marking strongly agree, strongly disagree. I'd rather choose disagree and agree unless I have a really good reason to move towards the strongly bit. Oh, Aryan, I am sure you are going to do well. Okay, so that's about the psychometric test. Let me take you over to the next segment, which is the descriptive test. Your descriptive test essentially has 2 components, right? The first is argument writing, where they give you a prompt and then they ask you to write, depending upon the previous year patterns, 3 to 5 points for that particular statement. Again, 3 to 5 points against that particular statement. And finally, you're supposed to write a 150 to 200 words. When you see the exam tomorrow, you'd know it exactly. A 150 to 200 word article / editorial where you take a clear-cut stance. If you do not take a stance, they are going to give you a 0. So please make sure that you take a stance, whether you are for or you are against, whatever it is. And considering that you've already thought of the points for and against, by then you would know which way you are leaning, right? Chirag, absolutely. There are marks for the descriptive section. Yeah, absolutely, yes. And in fact, this section is very, very important for MICAT. So there are, of course. But I'll not talk a lot about argument writing. Srinivas sir already covered it. And then you have already been working a lot on critical reasoning, hopefully. So you know what an argument is, you know how to support or how to stand against a particular stand. So thereafter, I mean, this is basically just an essay through which you share your opinion. In fact, I shouldn't even say an essay, I'd say it is a mini essay. So my general take is that you have 25 minutes, so you take out 10 minutes for argument writing, and the remaining 15 minutes should be left for story writing. So that's usually how I would prefer splitting my time. So Prerna, you don't have a separate time allocated in that sense, but you are supposed to go through argument writing and story writing both within the stipulated time. Yeah, absolutely, Bhaskar. Why not? You definitely, if you get decent enough percentile in that, so MICA gives 20% weightage to your CAT or the ZAT score. And if I look at their admission policy, I'd say around 20% of the people are actually taken on the basis of the ZAT score. So yes, definitely. So now in story writing, you already know the process. If you don't, I'll share that with you. So they basically give you 4 images and you are supposed to write a story around those images. So 4 images, you're supposed to include them in your story. And not only that, you're also supposed to indicate the sequence in which you have planned to use that. So here is my general checklist. If you give me 4 images, the first thing that I do is that I look at those images and then I think about the theme. Now, so for me, theme is when the reader is done reading the story, what is it that I want that person to be left with? You know, which emotional state do I want him to be in, or which message / moral do I want that person to be with? So that in a way becomes my beacon. Do I want that person to feel inspired? Do I want that person to be hopeful? Do I want that person to be joyous and ecstatic? Do I want that person to feel relieved once that story is over? So what is it that we would want to leave our reader with? And in case you're wondering, will I have time to think? I have 15 minutes. So see, basically you are supposed to write around 250 words of the story. That's your target. And you're typing it, you're not writing it. So if you were to type it, you will not take more than 4 minutes. So we are talking about 3.5 minutes to maybe 4 minutes of typing for most of us. It's possible that you are a faster typist, in which case you'd actually have you'd actually take even fewer minutes typing. So my hunch is that most of us who do use a laptop or a desktop, most of us who work with a keyboard, would definitely have around 70 words per minute typing speed, maybe more. So I'm just using that as a calculation, which means that you actually have 10-11 minutes to think it over before you start typing. So take 5-6 minutes and engage in all these things before you actually start. Fair enough. Then once you've decided on the theme, let's just think of the setting. Okay, the place where the story is going to be located, right? Or the time period in which you want it to be, or you can, so basically you try to create a backdrop or an atmosphere. So personally, when I write a story, in my first paragraph, I prefer being descriptive. Okay. And I describe the place, I talk about the time, I just build those settings. And when I'm writing those things, I am using sentences that help the reader see what is happening. I use sentences that help the reader hear the sounds that are around us. Okay, so you are in a way inviting the reader into that world that you are creating. So you decide on that setting, indoor or outdoor, a marketplace or a movie hall, morning or evening, all those kind of things. After that, you decide on characters. So you have those 4 images. So they are definitely 4 of the characters that you have. You can also introduce more characters. And when it comes to characters, you know that a character can be main character or supporting character. So a main character is going to be a hero or a heroine. We use the term protagonist for it. Then you can have a villain or a vamp, right? The technical word that we normally end up using is antagonist. And we nowadays we also have this concept of an anti-hero, right? So you can probably have an anti-hero, who cares, right? And then of course there are these supporting roles. So you may choose to have 1 or 2 of those characters from the images as main characters, and then the rest of them can play a supporting role. And even there, your character can be static and dynamic. Static character is a character that does not change, remains the same throughout. If it is good, it remains good throughout. If it is bad, it remains bad throughout. Whereas dynamic characters are characters that whose arc changes. They go from good to bad or bad to good, right? So that is how we look at it. And then there are technically, your characters can be complex or simple, round or flat, but that'll make it very technical for you. So just focus on these 2 things, that your characters can have these arcs, so these places within that story. And then every story has a conflict. So make sure that you think of that conflict. So you've set the settings, you've introduced your characters. Now there is something that is going to happen to them, something that is going to make them uncomfortable. So their life was great, and now suddenly there is an issue. So a conflict can be internal, a conflict can be external. Okay, so an internal conflict is something that happens within you. You are struggling with yourself. It can be with your upbringing, it can be with your nature. For example, I've seen a lot of students, when they write a mock test, a mock CAT, and their score is not that great, they become unhappy, they at times become depressed, they are not able to forgive themselves for that score, and therefore they are not able to focus on the next mock, right? But you need to overcome that, right? You need to fight your own tendency, your own thought process, and overcome that. So that conflict is internal. And then you can have some sort of external conflict. So an external conflict can be a man versus man conflict. It can be, and this is something that you would find very useful in the exam, man versus nature conflict. And it can be even a man versus society conflict. And here when I say man, I am just talking about your protagonist, and we know that a protagonist may not even be a man. It can be an alien, it can be an animal, it can for that matter even be an inanimate object, who cares, right? So just treat it as your protagonist. So it's your struggle of the protagonist with somebody else of the same species or another species. Remember predator, man versus alien. It can be about nature, it can be about society. So typically in most of the movies you'd see man versus man, where you have a villain. It can be man versus nature. Remember those movies like 2012, where there is a flood or a volcano erupts or whatever. And then of course there are these evils of society that some of these movies go ahead and talk about. And then you start developing or working on your plot. So your plot essentially has 5 things: exposition, then you introduce the beginning of the conflict, then you escalate that conflict, we call it rising action, then you have a climax, then a falling action, and then finally a resolution. So exposition is the beginning part. This is where you talk about your setting and your atmosphere and your characters. Then the beginning, okay, that incident which starts it. You've seen a lot of movies where the hero goes to a college and he just bumps into the village in the cafeteria and the tray falls. It's a minor action, but from there the animosity, the enmity is born. And then you would have progressively bigger and more heinous actions being performed. So that beginning of the conflict and then the rising action. So you've already established the conflict. Now you gradually take your protagonist to the point of crisis. And finally, at climax, that crisis or that challenge is resolved. So this is the most challenging moment where the protagonist emerges hopefully victorious. Okay. And then falling action. So this comes immediately after the climax and it introduces you to the consequences. Remember when finally the hero has defeated the villain, police comes and captures him. The other members of the hero's family come and greet him, meet him, hug him, and then finally a resolution. This tells us what happens to the characters after that climax. Okay, and then this is where that emotion that you leave the reader with would also be dominating. So typically you'd notice that in a movie or even elsewhere, the hero may need to, or the protagonist may need to build some new alliances or learn certain new things in order to have a favorable outcome. Yes, Prerna, you can mention that you have introduced these images in this order. So let us say there are 4 images, right? A, B, C, D. So in your story, it is possible that C comes first, then you introduce A, then you introduce D, and then you introduce B. So you just mention that sequence in which you have used those 4 images in your story. So you're free to arrange them in whichever way. You're free to arrange their introduction in the story in whichever sequence you want, but that sequence needs to be shared. Okay, so that's about plot. And then, so hopefully if you do these things, once you have all these things in your mind, you just start typing. So I normally see that for majority of the people, it takes around 5 to 6 minutes in which they are able to go through this entire process. Then they sit down and write, which takes around 4 odd minutes. And after that, you typically have another couple of minutes with you, in which case I would want you to read it again and fix any issue that you see. It can be a grammatical issue, spelling issue, whatever. Just go ahead and fix it. And finally, we move over to the aptitude test. Aptitude test is something that you're already familiar with. So you know that you have 80 questions in 80 minutes, +1 and -0.25 for wrong. Okay. Which means that you want to go from easy questions to difficult questions. You would like to start with questions which are less time consuming and then move towards questions which are more time consuming. So when I approach this section, so you know there are 4 subsections here and you are free to attempt them in whichever order that you want to. So I typically start with general awareness. Now, why do I start with general awareness? So typically, I know that I have 1 minute per question, but when it comes to the 20 questions of general awareness, chances are that you'd be able to go through all of them in 5 to 6 minutes. And mind you, I'm saying you'd be able to go through. You may or may not know the answers, but you're done with the segment, this subsection, right? मतलब आंसर आए नहीं आए, कम से कम हमें पता तो है, हमने 20 क्वेश्चन देख लिए, जो आता था वो कर दिया, जो नहीं आता था वो छोड़ दिया. So 10 of these are typically static GK, another 10 are typically current affairs, and obviously there is a distinct preference for marketing and advertising, etc. in this section. Thereafter, I move over to VARC. VARC because it is once again usually not very time consuming. So you would have these fill in the blank questions, grammar based questions, etc. So these questions typically do not take you much time. So once you're through with these two sections, you will know how much time you are left with and how much time now can be devoted towards answering the questions of the remaining two sections. So I usually start with QA, quantitative ability, where I read all the questions and solve those that are easy. And here for me, easy will be any question that I can solve in, say, under 60 seconds. Thereafter, I go towards divergent and convergent thinking section, where the first question types that I go ahead and attempt are questions where I am asked to arrive at a conclusion and questions that are based on word association tests. Now see, word association tests can be tricky. They are vocabulary dominant. They also in a way test your ability to be creative. They also test your ability of using a particular word as part of an idiom or a phrasal verb as well. So they're definitely creative, but I notice that if I know them, if I'm able to see a connection readily, it will not take long. If I don't see a connection readily, I just move on. So start with these, and after that, you can go ahead and come back to the remaining QA/DCT questions. Now that you've gone through all the 4 sections, you will be in a position to decide that part where you can maximize your score. So that is what my order in the exam be, but then it is pretty subjective. Maybe you are somebody who is sensationally good at quant. Start with that. Maybe you are somebody who finds divergent and convergent thinking very easy. Or identifying assumptions does not take you much time. Maybe you can start with those. So by now, you know your strengths. Make sure that you use those strengths to decide on the order in which you go ahead and attempt these questions, right? So that's what my approach will be. If you have any other question, any other concern, please don't hesitate and ask me. Otherwise, here's a thought that I'm going to share with you. If you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So that's what you require for MICAT. A bit of creativity, a bit of changed perspective, and I'm sure that you can go ahead and do an amazing, amazing job. Okay, Chirag, there are no cutoff marks as such, but if you are at around, so psychometric test is qualifying, right? So if the psychometric test indicates that you're not a good fit for the college, they won't even proceed further. And then you have descriptive and the 80 marks given to the aptitude part. So normally, I think if you end up scoring around 50% of the total score, it is possible for you to convert. Okay. Naisha, there are no sectional cutoffs as such, but psychometric test is qualifying in nature. And if you don't qualify, they'd not even proceed further. And after that, it is about the total marks that you get from MICAT. Then they take you through a group exercise and a personal interview, which carry, and those 2 stages carry a 50% weightage. MICAT score will carry a 30% weightage. CAT or ZAT score will carry a 20% weightage. So that's how it works, right? So that's it from me today. If you enjoyed working with me, don't forget to hit the like button. And if you're new here, do subscribe. And once MICAT, okay, I forgot to probably add it here, but once MICAT 1 is over tomorrow, we'd have a session at 2:30 on our channel where we'd give you the analysis of the exam and the way you could have and should have approached it. So if you know people who are preparing for CAT 23, do recommend us. And we are there on Instagram, Facebook and Telegram too, so you can follow us there as well. On Telegram, it is actually a two-way group where you can ask your doubts to the faculty members directly. So पता है अभी आप YouTube पे हैं, live session है, आप doubt पूछ पा रहे हैं, but what if you have a question an hour from now? तब क्या करें? Telegram channel में जाओ, question डालो, we definitely look at it, right? So that's it from me today. I look forward to meeting you real soon. Until then, take care, enjoy your evening, relax, chill, and all the best for your MICAT tomorrow. I know that you are going to do fabulously well in your exam, right? So I'll see you at 2:30 tomorrow at this channel for the analysis of MICAT 1. Until then, take care, have fun.